Hello everyone. So today I'm doing a little breakdown on Shadow Man, the little AI live action short I produced a little while back and released a few days before Halloween 2025. If you haven't watched it yet, I do recommend seeing it, as it will make this video much more rewarding to watch. I'll leave a link in the comment section. And if you feel up to it, leave a like and a comment, as it really helps the channel grow. So why did I make this little short? Do I plan to make exclusively AI content from now on? No, it was more an experiment more than anything else. I wanted to see if it was possible to tell a story in a contained setting and as much as possible keep the continuity of the characters. Now, I'm not an AI expert by any stretch of the imagination. I am first and foremost a filmmaker with a little bit of knowledge about AI. A lot of this stuff I had to learn from scratch, and knowing what I do now, I do admit that my workflow initially was pretty flawed. So every film, long or short, starts with a screenplay, right? I never wrote the Shadow Man screenplay per se. I did write the voiceover for ghoulish Gerald that Emma is listening to. Gerald himself is AI, both the images and his voice, although I did write his monologue myself. So basically I had an idea of setting this little story inside a car. The basic plot was always that a woman would listen to some sort of podcast, realize someone was in the back seat and then stomp on the brakes, having her would-be attacker fly out through the windscreen. Now, filmmaking is not a process that is set in stone, where you have a plan and then execute that plan to perfection. Sometimes things happen along the way that forces you to change the game plan one way or another. Now, interestingly, it turns out that making an AI film is actually kind of similar. Some shots I was just not able to produce with a satisfactory result. So I was forced to work myself around those shots. And one major mistake I made early on changed the story quite a bit, and I think actually for the better. Most of the shots are based on still images that I then ran through different video generators. This is really the only way to go if you're going to create something with multiple shots and with continuity. If you're just doing text to video, it's more or less like throwing darts blindfolded, and you end up with something like this. So everything started out with this image of Emma. And of course Emma does not really exist, but for simplicity's sake I'll refer to her as Emma. So this was created using Midjourney. It's actually about 6 months ago that I did this one, which feels like a lifetime when talking about AI. I'm no prompt expert. I sort of approached the whole thing as if I was writing a paragraph in a screenplay. Not sure this is the proper way to go about it, but for me this method seems to work fairly well. And as always with AI, there was plenty of goofy images generated before I had something that was actually usable. So finally, after about 50 attempts at creating an image, I settled on this one. Now, had I done it all over again, I would not have chosen this image for the base of my entire short. Although it was the best out of the lot, there are some problems. First off, since the story is set in the US, she's sitting on the wrong side of the car, but that was a pretty easy fix. The light on her face is also a bit too harsh and bright, making her look a little bit synthetic. And the hands look weird, with one hand missing a finger and the knuckles look a bit off. And the light in the background should be red, simulating the glow of the taillights. So there was a lot of photoshopping that had to go on before I felt the image was usable. In hindsight, I really should have created a full set of shots for every angle I needed before I started doing video generations, just to make sure it was possible to pull off everything I intended to do, with the look and the tone consistent. I think I was just seduced by all the hype around AI, so I was somewhat sure that pulling off all the other images would be a fairly simple task, now that I had my starting image. But oh, how wrong I was. I was just so eager to get going that I started experimenting with this image. I have used a couple of different video generators, but the main one I tend to rely on is Kling. It's not perfect, but in general I felt it produced the best overall results. And when I started working on this, only version 1.6 was available. I mainly used the Higgsfield AI platform, where you have lots of tools available on the one roof, so to speak, so you don't need a separate subscription for every single tool. So this was the first clip I created based on the image I showed, and I was just blown away by the result. This was actually one of the clips I ended up using in the final film. There were some odd shadows in the background, but it turned out to work pretty great, since there is a part where Shadow Man is supposed to climb into the back seat, so it was one of those happy accidents. In that way, I feel editing an AI film is actually kind of similar compared to editing live action footage. You find the pieces that work and then start building the puzzle. I know there are video generators that can produce fully edited videos, but none of the editing in Shadow Man is automated. I'm using DaVinci Resolve Studio since I recently switched from using Adobe Premiere. The biggest challenge in the film was trying to portray a sense of growing fear. Emma starts out kind of tense listening to the podcast, but the more Gerald reveals about the lore of Shadow Man, the more terrified she gets. And doing these subtle shifts was really, really tricky. And there are generations that worked and others that didn't work. I was really happy with many of these shots. And then I realized I had made a major screw up. Can you see it? Yeah. She's not wearing a seatbelt. I don't understand how it was possible for me to miss this, but suddenly all this stuff was more or less unusable, which was extremely depressing. But getting back to how filmmaking is often a very fluid process, I started thinking about if I could somehow write myself around this. And that's when the entire mythology of Shadow Man came up. As I said earlier, the idea was always that there was supposed to be someone in the back seat, but I had not decided exactly what. At first I thought it would just be some sort of serial killer, but what if it was some kind of ghoulish spirit? The spirit of a man who had died in a car crash and now stalked people who were not using their seatbelts. I actually thought this was kind of a fun idea. And suddenly the concept of the film clicked into place. I sort of did this film in two parts. I started out around April, then more or less gave up, then decided to finish it during October. I don't know if this was a moment in time, but for whatever reason, when I tried to do some additional footage of Emma come October, it felt like Kling AI was in an entirely different mood. All these beautiful shots were suddenly not achievable anymore. Suddenly it looked like Emma was trying out for a Formula 1 team. So getting both the acting right and the speed of the car was really, really tricky and always sort of a compromise. When I started working on this, there wasn't really a good way to create various angles of a character and keep the look consistent. So I was more or less locked into this specific angle. But I really wanted a shot from the back seat looking at Emma, getting a sense that someone was observing her. In the last couple of months, there has been a lot of software development when it comes to creating character consistency. But for whatever reason, creating a sort of POV shot from the back of the car was next to impossible. Quite a few times it was considered inappropriate content, and a gold star to anyone who can figure out why. Finally, my friend Anton was able to pull something off. It's slightly out of focus and quite the wrong color, but it was as close as we got. And with some tweaking in the color grading, you sort of get away with it. So now came the drawn-out process of creating all the other footage. Footage that would have taken 5 minutes to create in a live-action film became a major undertaking. Case in point would be this: a foot stomping on a brake pedal. I mean, how hard could that be? I naively asked myself. First off, just generating a usable image was a nightmare. And when I finally had one, I needed Emma's boot to stomp hard on the brake. So this is Kling's idea of stomping hard on a brake pedal. I tried rewriting the prompt and putting a lot of emphasis on just how hard she stomps on the brakes, but to no avail. This was the shot I finally settled on. It's not really much of a stomp, so what I had to do was to create a couple of freeze frames and hide it all with a zoom, and with some sound effects you kind of get away with it. Next we have this road sign that Emma passes. This went through a whole lot of variations, and I also noticed that moving cars tends to look quite fake when it comes to AI. I knew I wanted the little town to be called Hope Springs, with someone having added the word eternal at the bottom. I used ChatGPT to create this one, which I really liked, although the word eternal was supposed to be painted so it partly covered the word springs, but it was really hard to pull off. I thought the first couple of seconds looked really great. The problem was that the taillights of the car suddenly flicked off, and a couple of seconds later the car vanished. So I had to do a zoom in on the crow, which ruined the resolution quite a bit. So I had to abandon this entire shot. And maybe it was just as well, since the light doesn't really match any of the other footage. The final clip looked like this. The still image felt really great, although I would have preferred a more narrow road. The word eternal was misspelled. Luckily a friend of mine, Victor, that works with VFX, helped me fix this. I suppose in the entire short this is probably the most fake looking shot, but overall I think it looked pretty cool. In theory you can sit around doing generation after generation after generation as long as you want, waiting for that jackpot shot, so to speak, but you just blow through your credits. So eventually I had to settle for something that I felt was maybe 80% of what I was looking for. Maybe the most interesting aspect of the production was the shots on the phone and the podcast. At first I tried generating a shot of a dashboard with the phone attached and a thumbnail for the podcast, which was more or less impossible. And when I tried running it through Kling, it was even worse. One idea was to have some of my VFX buddies key in the thumbnail on the phone, but I felt that would be straying too far from the experiment. Next, I tried actual footage of a road with my phone on the dashboard and ran it through Kling. The thumbnail was supposed to be a still frame, but Kling insisted that Gerald should be talking. So the idea I finally settled on was new technology meeting old school. Originally, the podcast was just supposed to be a still image. But after doing some experimentation, I realized it would be kind of cool if actually Gerald spoke and moved around. So I did a couple of different angles of him talking into the microphone. Then used Kling to make the images come alive. And finally the sync tool to implement the voice. It was fine, but to be honest, it doesn't look perfect. There's too little movement on the face itself, with mostly like the jaw and the lips moving. So next I exported this footage so I could play it on my phone. Then on a cold dark night I headed out into the forest to record my phone attached to my actual dashboard. The LED light outside is set to 5600 Kelvin. I really wanted a bluish tone to somewhat match the light on Emma's face, so what I did was set the white balance on the camera to 3200, then went into the settings on the phone to make the screen warmer, so it would look more natural in the camera. And then I played the footage on the phone and sort of jerked the camera around a bit to match the movement of the car. I don't scare very easily, but I do admit it was kind of creepy sitting alone in the car on this windy night and filming the phone and hearing Gerald talk about how someone was hiding in the backseat of my car. Finally, we have Shadow Man crashing through the windscreen. The base for all this is an actual shot of my car standing on a forest road. The inspiration for the angle was actually a shot from Halloween H2O, where Michael Myers crashes through a windscreen towards the end of the film. So I had the shot. All I needed to do now was having Shadow Man crash through the windscreen, which was a real pain in the, something. Kling really wanted a creature crashing in from outside, no matter how much I tried to explain that it should be coming from inside the car, crashing out. Finally, I realized that the only way to pull this off was actually to create a creature sitting by the steering wheel. And then, when I tried it again, he finally flew out of there. My friend Pio helped me out with the color grading. I wanted to get away from the sort of glossy AI look, so we did a little bit of desaturation and also added a 16mm film grain just to make things look a bit more rough around the edges. The music itself is from Premium Beat, made by an actual human, and then I have my friend Ulf at Tonkällan help me fine-tune the sound design. A lot of people I've shown this short to has been telling me that this would work great as a commercial about the importance of wearing a seatbelt. Now, I did not set out to make a quote-unquote message film, so to speak. The idea was just to make a fun little spooky story for Halloween. But hey, if it makes someone out there put on their seatbelt when they usually don't, then I guess that's a pretty good thing. All in all, it took me somewhere around 150 work hours to pull this off. But you learn as you go, and had I done it all over again, I think I would have probably cut the work time in half. So what are my conclusions of doing an AI film project? To be honest, I'm not quite sure. We're just in a place in time right now where very few of us really know what will be the outcome of AI, and not just in filmmaking but in life in general, I suppose. But if I would make an attempt to gather some of my thoughts, I think these tools that I've shown in the video can be really useful, and this certainly was a fun experiment, although quite frigging frustrating at times. Could I, in theory, make a feature film with the tools I have available right now? I would say so, if I had a lot of time to spare, but I would still need help from actual human beings, just as was the case with the short film. But would we be able to create an absolutely flawless feature film, which was impossible to distinguish from a real live-action version? At the moment, I'd say no. But who knows what this tech will look like in 5 years, or even 1 year? But maybe the bigger question in all this, would people really want to watch a feature film done exclusively using AI, from screenplay all the way to post-production? I can only speak for myself, and I will probably show up to have a look at this hypothetical movie just out of curiosity. But in the long run, would I really want to watch movies done exclusively on a computer? No, probably not. At the end of the day, AI is a tool, And like any tool, it could be used for creating good things and bad things. So what's your experience with creating AI images and videos? Has it been fun or frustrating? Do you think it will overtake real live filmmaking at some point? So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again soon.